Welcome to Waking the Why, a podcast about uncovering the purpose behind life's crucible moments. Each episode, you'll hear from real people who turn their struggles into strength and their stories into light. If you're searching for meaning, walking through something hard, or just love stories that stir the soul, you're in the right place. Hello, friends, and welcome to Waking the Why, where we discover the purpose behind life's crucible moments. My name is Stacy Peterson, and our guest today is Nancy Sylvester. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Stacy, for having me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation to hear more and learn more about your story and what you do and who you are. So let's start there.
Oh gosh, how do I even begin? Well, professionally, I'm an employment attorney, so I work for one of the large national firms downtown called Ogletree Deacons, and I've been here for about a year. In terms of who I am, that is a very loaded question. There's so much going on there, but I'll start with kind of my origin. I'm an identical twin, and so she's awesome, and I was not awesome growing up. So it created some competition and some drive because she was a high-level athlete and I was a choir nerd. And so people would always ask us, because they couldn't tell who was who except when she was running, are you the runner?
Right.
And I would say, no, I don't have a label. And so I didn't ever know how to respond to that. And so, but I think that was one of those things, like, in your teenage years, you're growing and trying to figure out who you are. And for me, that part of life was, I think in some ways harder than for other people, just because, like, not only did I not have, I was competing for an identity with my sister.
Right.
And so I just kind of felt like I really just needed to kind of chart my own path. So that was back in California, and I'm in Utah. So that'll tell you right there that my path took a very different turn. She's still in California and has gotten married and had kids and has a business with her husband, and she's great. Like, I love her, and she's my best friend, and we still call. We've got inside jokes and stuff, but my life took a very different turn because I just didn't want to be in somebody else's shadow, and I wanted to just have my own purpose and do my own thing, and that came with a lot of trials. But I moved myself to Los Angeles right after I graduated college, and had a mattress on a floor, and found a job down there, and was there for about 5 years and went to law school there. And
so that's what took you to LA, was law school.
Took me to LA. I met my husband there right before I made my decision to go to law school. Okay. So it was really one of those, like, your brain is just not developed and really dumb. Like, I had decisions to make, and I just met him, and I went, I kind of like where this is going. I guess I'll just stay put, and it wasn't like, that really wasn't thought through. It was just kind of like, this seems okay. Maybe, like, who says that when you've dated somebody for like 2 weeks? But I did, and thankfully it worked out. We were engaged like 3 months later. Yeah. So, and then I had a baby, our first, at the end of my second year of law school. So, yeah.
Wow, I have so many questions.
I know there's
in that regard.
So much, there's so much kind of baked into there, but for whatever reason, that drive led to some very lonely decisions and situations where I was just by myself and going, what is wrong with you? Why did you do this? Why did you feel like you just had to kind of like go do your own thing and not have family and friend support around you, and yet I just felt really strongly about it, and it's definitely shaped a lot of who I am.
Yeah, for sure. So why law school?
Oh, I always wanted to be a lawyer. Really? Starting in about 5th grade. Yeah, my dad was the small town lawyer, and I just thought it was really cool what he was doing, and I always pictured myself with a briefcase and kind of practicing law with him, and ultimately that wasn't my path. We tried to explore that, and I just don't think my dad had it in him to, at the end of his career, to train me up to be a lawyer, and I think he was just tired. There was just, like, when I graduated from law school, that was when the Great Recession was going on, and there was just a lot of just turmoil in the economy, and just some weird things going on with his clients. And I think in some ways he was trying to protect me by not bringing me on, but it left me with a weird place of kind of, well, now what? This was kind of my plan.
Right.
And so I had to, again, figure things out.
So where did that lead you?
Well, it led us to Utah. Kind of funny because I think my husband and I, we had some real trials that happened around that time. He tried to start a business. I was trying to figure this out with my dad's law practice. And we had moved from Los Angeles with our little 2-year-old up to the Central Coast of California. And not a lot of jobs there. And so you really have to be an entrepreneur to make it. And we just, our profit margin, like we had no money and a lot of motivation and not a lot of guidance. And so really we're kind of on this collision course for failing big time. And so my husband's uncle was getting married and my husband Chris said, well, what about Utah? We could just move there. He's moving out of his house and the economy's stronger there. And it was a shock to my system, but again, I make sometimes dumb decisions, right? And so I'm like, okay, fine, let's move. And that was really, really hard because we moved here to Utah where we knew almost nobody and had to adjust to a whole new culture as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, have you ever been to Utah before that point?
We'd been once. So, and definitely very, very different. And I was not a member of the church. And so it was so different, but I also immediately recognized just that people were really nice. And so I thought, well, it's kind of like a big state of just like small town people. That was my first impression of Utah. And it wasn't long after we got there, like we landed, Chris got a job within like 3 weeks of us getting here and at a Subaru dealership and quickly started excelling there. I was in this weird spot where I had graduated from law school in California. I had taken the California bar exam, and then, I think it was about probably 3 weeks after we moved to Utah, maybe a little bit longer, I found out I passed the California bar exam. That does you nothing in Utah, right? So, and I had no connections to the community, to the legal community, and so. It kind of left me like, well, now what? I'm here. But my parents had felt, for a long time, I knew that they'd been involved with the women's shelter in my hometown. They had supported it and volunteered and financially supported it. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll just volunteer, and at the women's shelter and kind of see what happens. And so I literally walked through the door of the women's shelter up in Weber County, and I said, I need something to do. I'm really bored. I just graduated law school. Is there anything you need help with? And they had me.
I bet they were like,
yes. I know. Yeah, I think they said, well, yes. Can you come back tomorrow? And I said, yes. And so I came back and I started just doing some grant work for them and grant writing, and that lasted about 3 weeks until all of a sudden they needed a domestic violence victim advocate, and so they hired me on for that, and I did that for about a year. And talk about hard work. Oh my gosh. I'm grateful for that experience. I will forever be grateful. It's why, you know me, I have tons of interests, and that is in part, I will always believe strongly in women empowerment and supporting families, because I have seen families at their worst. I've seen how drugs and alcohol can really tear down families, and just kind of I've seen a lot, and it's but one of the reasons why I wanted to do that work too was because I knew it would cause me to be in court, and so I appeared in court a few times a week, just being there for the victims. So, and I got to know some of the court system and some of the players, and in fact some people that I met at that time who worked with Utah Legal Services, I still know them. I consider them friends. And that was, gosh, how many years ago? When did we get here? 2011. So that was like 15 years ago. And I still fondly go, we knew each other right when I moved here, like beginning my career. Yeah. So, but that's really kind of where I started to gain an interest in, like, women need help. And especially what's interesting is that, and this has been true, I've seen this in my work with A Bolder Way Forward, that sometimes, when you've got kind of a religion that is very prominent in a place, that also can lead to some really interesting issues, especially, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is very family focused, but then sometimes I think we lose sight of the fact that not every family is perfect.
Right.
And there can be a lot of hardship that happens in families, and you start adding anything like drugs and alcohol or poor choices, it can really, even poverty,
Yeah.
Or intergenerational domestic violence can mean people just don't have a good shake, and it's hard, especially young kids. But I just still will treasure that time, even though it was extremely hard. I will always treasure that time that I had serving. So, and that ultimately led actually to me, after about a year, I got a job working, and I'd taken and passed the Utah State Bar in the meantime.
Okay,
so that was a really, how do I put this? I was working about 80 hours a week that summer because we'd lost staff at the shelter, and I had to still study for this exam. Right. And I hadn't gone to school in Utah, and thankfully I'd already passed the California bar exam, so I kind of knew how to study. But I don't know by the skin of my teeth I passed, but I'll never forget this prosecutor I went to the prosecutor's office regularly to help him screen charges with domestic violence. And I said, I just can't do this. I'm so exhausted. I'm on call all the time. And he said, Nancy, what do you have to lose? He's like, just go take it. You've already passed one. And I'll never forget that. It was, I can't remember his last name. He'll come to me. But he was one of the prosecutors in Ogden City. And he then ended up going on to become a judge. And I remember once I passed the Utah bar, I got my little paper, and I literally took a photocopy of it in their office, and I just stuck it to the wall with a pin, and I said, thank you. Like that, you helped me. Like I wouldn't have done this without your encouragement, because I didn't think I could do it. And but after that, I went into work. I'm like, I passed the Utah bar, and they went, great. Oh, because like that meant I could practice law here in Utah now. So but I didn't right away, because the economy was still weird. Still didn't know that many people, and so but I knew I needed to do something different. Working at the domestic violence shelter was too hard, and I just needed to kind of move on with my career. And so the Supreme Court was hiring, our Utah Supreme Court. And so, but they weren't hiring for an attorney. They were hiring for a legal secretary. Oh. And I thought, what the heck? I'm just going to throw my hat in the ring and see what happens. I never thought they would pick me, because I was overqualified. I had passed 2 bar exams. I should have been out practicing as a lawyer, but I had contacted lawyers' offices, and they're just like, we don't really know what to do with you, and so, but I got hired on at the Supreme Court, and I was Chief Justice Durant's right-hand woman for about a year and a half. So, and that ultimately led to my, actually going and practicing law. But in the meantime, I got this really weird experience going in, to an environment that I did not objectively qualify for, because it's really hard to go in as an attorney who's not excelled in law school, and coming from kind of, I wouldn't say a no-name school. Everybody knew my school out in California, but Utah is much more insular, so it looks at, a lot of employers look at did you go to the 2 schools here, or did you go to a school that's recognizable? Well, mine was a commuter school in California. It wasn't that recognizable here. So I got in against kind of all odds, and got to hang out with some of the smartest people that I've ever met, but just not just the brightest, but also just good people. And, it had been, when we moved here, we came under such weird circumstances that I just, it's kind of our ships felt just a little bit rudderless, and I didn't really, I get that grounding feeling, and I missed my family, and why am I here? Why, God? Right. Why am I here? Mm-hmm. And, but I figured it out pretty quickly, because we started having a lot of just talks. The nice thing about the Supreme Court is that it's a very academic environment, and all the clerks were around my age. They'd all just graduated law school, and so when there was some downtime, we would just sit there and jibber jabber. And I was kind of the clerk of court, and Andrea Martinez, she's a treasure. She's still one of my very favorite people. She and I became the little kind of party planning, social committee there. And so we just, anyway, it was just a lot of fun. But it also opened up some opportunities to just kind of talk to people.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I had another baby, so I was on now baby number 2. I came back from maternity leave, and I had gotten to know this last set of clerks, but then there was a new set, and they came in and like they were even more fun. And so we had even more conversations, and no offense to anybody who might have seen this who was the first crop, but the second crop was like, they were so fun, and there was something about them. They just kind of let me just chat through like cultural differences between California and Utah, and my religious experiences and that sort of thing. And I got to ask a lot of questions just about like their faith and what they believed, and I made fun of them about the coffee thing. And like even for Christmas, I got them like these like reusable Starbucks cups, and I like marked them up, and I put like the strongest caffeine possible that you could get, right? And it was like a tease, and they kind of like chuckled, but were like, just let her have this one, you know what I mean? And so but then one of them, Tyler Steer, I'll never forget him, because he invited me and Andrea Martinez to go to sing with the Tabernacle Choir. He was in the choir, and so we got to go do this like it was a practice with the choir, and it's intended to be like a missionary thing, but we just thought it was cool. We could show up. We both like to sing. And that was life-changing. And not long after that, Tyler left to go. He was done with his clerkship, but on his last day, this was so sneaky, he like leaves the Book of Mormon on my desk. And I took a picture and I sent it to my husband. I was like, oh no, the Mormons are going to get us. And so, but and they did. I ended up joining the church not long after that, but I started reading the book, and I was taking the bus every day, because we lived in North Salt Lake, and we were on a bus route, and we had no money. Like I was supporting the family on my $18 an hour job, which was crazy. We had an infant and a toddler, and my husband, God bless him, like we just looked at our finances and went, there's no way that both of us, like we're going to be taking one of our incomes entirely and putting it into into daycare. Yeah. And he said, you just graduated from law school. We have to focus on your career. So he said, I'll stay home. And I said, are you sure? Like, that's a lot for a man. And he said, yeah, I'm sure. And oh man, the trials that we went through just through that, because he had no support network as a man. And this was still, like early 2000s. Like we got here in 2011. So probably 2013. It's still like, Utah wasn't what it is now. Like it had not grown quite to the extent. I think we added like 1 million people or something since we've been here. And so it still was very kind of culturally very conservative. And so we felt like we had to explain to a lot of people like what this thing was that we were doing, you know. But he felt strongly about investing in my career, and so he stayed home. But in that gamble paid off. But in the meantime, we did join the church. We found our people, like our rudder kind of started to stabilize, and really felt like, okay, it looks like maybe this is why we were supposed to be here, is to kind of build this, and met some amazing people, like pioneer stock, which like people who are new to the church, like when you meet somebody who's got pioneer stock, you're like, whoa, you're a special kind of person. You have like wheat in your cabinets, that, and a grinder, right?
It's probably full of weevils.
I know, totally.
Seriously.
Probably full of, weevils, but also I don't know, but also we needed the people to just kind of be like, we know that you have 3-hour church right now, and it's hard with an infant, but like you just go, just do it, because like we didn't have, phones and stuff to entertain our kids, and we did it. I just looked at them like, you people are really strong. Like I can do this, and so.
There is something about the belief of that pioneer stock of individuals.
It totally,
for
yeah.
Sure.
Well, and I like clearly I have some of that in me. I
100%.
mean, right? I've been like willing to go, to do these things all by myself, and to take risks, and to move, and not knowing kind of where we were going to land. And I brought up the domestic violence shelter. The reason why my parents were so involved in that was because my grandmother was my mom's dad. He was very violent towards my grandmother, and back in the 50s when my mom was little, and and would beat her up basically every day. And so in the 50s, you had to go to the court and ask for, to even be released from your marriage. And, it was kind of unheard of, right? Like you had to go beg. And so there was no fault divorces. And so this is where I feel strongly about policy, and you can't leave people stranded in marriages. They have to have an off-ramp when there's abuse. And, for her, she had to work through a lot, and I know I have that. I know I have her in me, because she basically took my mom and her out of that situation, and they literally packed their things one day after my grandfather went to work, and they just left, and so I'm like, yeah, that tracks. I definitely have that in me, right? So not that I try not to run, but so anyway, so the pioneer people, like, I definitely felt an affinity for people who had this pioneer stock and were willing to do hard things. So, and I think that, I've always tried to, like, kind of, I want to say, distance myself a little bit just from some of the relationships that I have that I've still kept from the Supreme Court, because I've had a job that has meant that I've still kind of been around that. But Chief Justice Durant has become, his family is basically like our family, and I remember trying to be so cautious about, like, his example, and he's, they're members of the church. I was like, this is like, you're one of the coolest people I've ever met, and you're just so awesome, and I see how awesome your family is. But he was one of the big reasons why I joined. Like, obviously my friend Tyler's influence played a big role, because he had, the chutzpah, right, to, like, give me a book. Yeah, right. But it was, the chief that I just looked at him, I thought, gosh, for somebody who's so smart, who went to Harvard, and he's had probably so many opportunities to walk away if it wasn't true. And he hasn't,
I think it's amazing, the examples that we have around us, right? And I think at times, I don't think the individuals really realize the influence that they're having, but I think it's important to surround ourselves, right? So for whatever reason, you ended up at a place surrounded by him and other individuals with their influence. In the end, it's still your choice, right?
Totally.
And so there's no doubt that some of that pioneer stock is in you too. I remember having a conversation with one of my colleagues a long time ago, Tanner Mickelson, and we were talking about the pioneers coming across, and I was just like, I could have never done it. Are you kidding me? I can't sleep in the dirt. I'm not built that way.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he said, yes, you could.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, Tanner, I really couldn't. He's like, no, Stacy, you're doing it today. Right? They're hard. They did their hard. You're doing your hard today. And I don't know. I've thought about it for a long time now, just saying it's true. It's true. We all have hard.
Yeah.
We all at times step into the unknown.
Yeah.
Others run into it, find excitement into it, and others are like, oh, just slowly going in there. But we kind of come out on the other side of understanding, right? But when we're in the middle, we don't always see it for
hard,
sure.
Yeah. No, there's no doubt. And we've been through some health issues in our family, and there's been times I've just been on my knees just praying to get through it, right? But I know, like, I just know those early experiences of, like, I'm going to go do this on my own were prepping me for those times when I've had to go through some really hard stuff in our family. And there was one time in particular, it was probably about 4 years ago, that I was going through a really hard time with some family health issues. And one of my friends gave me a talk. It was by, I think it was Elder Holland, and it was the one about the Liberty Jail being, like a temple experience. And I listened to that one on just repeat, because I thought, gosh, if Joseph Smith could have a temple experience in Liberty Jail when he's literally, they're trying to murder him, like, I can get through this. Yeah. And I'll never forget, I had a neighbor who was, my neighbor Chrissy, she was so sweet, and she's like, how can I help? And I said, I can't answer that for you. I don't know, but it will come to you how you're supposed to help. And she did, she figured out how to just help me. I had other friends around me that helped me too, and I'm like, really wise, Nance. Where did that come from?
That's what I was going to say. I'm impressed with that answer, because most of the time it's like, oh, nothing, I'm fine.
Yeah.
You know, but for you to say that.
But I was like, I know I need help. I just don't know what it is. But there was it was like things that just, all of a sudden somebody would show up with something that just made sense in the moment. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know I needed that. Yeah. I'm really grateful that you listened to that prompting, you know, and acted on it. And those experiences have made me realize how critical it is for us to act on those promptings. Like I feel like we're not alone, and we're constantly have, you know, angels, spirit guides, whatever you want to call it, that are there. And we just have to be in tune enough. And as odd as it sounds, I don't hate the trials anymore, because like that's when I've been closest to the spirit. It's when I have not only seen the most growth, but also I don't just had these like kind of like influxes of revelation and peace and calm despite whatever chaotic situation that I'm in.
Yeah, it's so true. When I started one of my companies, there was a 3-year time span. I wasn't sure I was going to make it. And I'm not talking about the business itself. That's a true story. I wasn't sure about the business, but me.
Yeah.
And I had 10 very specific experiences that taught me critical lessons. And I look back on that time, it's seriously one of the hardest times of my life, if not the hardest time of my life. And I can look back now on it and say, I kind of miss it, which is really weird to say. It was so hard.
Yeah.
But I felt supported in a way. I don't know, the spirit that I felt, the guidance that was given, and of course it was in my pit of despair moments, I call them. Like I can't handle this, can't do it. But I think at times of trial, no matter how big or small, I think those times draw us to our knees in a way that's different when we're not experiencing a trial. And so I miss those moments, right?
I know, right? And then sometimes you're like, I don't want to pray for that. Like, please don't.
No,
I really don't.
I'm not praying for that moment. Please don't give it back to me.
Yeah, I don't really want that, but
no, I don't want it. But there's just something about what you become through it.
Yeah,
that I can look back and say, I am so grateful for that. Hard.
Yeah.
I don't really want to do it again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But we've learned from all of it. Yeah. No, and I agree. I think that you know, you've asked me about kind of all of my interests. Like and they've all been born out of those experiences of just whatever hard it was. So, for example, I'm very interested in like the state of our democracy, and especially I really fight for judicial independence, because after I worked for Chief Justice Durant, I moved on to the general counsel's office and was there for about 7 years in the state court. And in that time, I really grew an appreciation for just how special that branch of government is, and that it truly does have to be apolitical. Like I would have never had a voice. I didn't have a LinkedIn profile. I had nothing, because I was so scared to say anything that could reflect badly upon the courts. And it's not badly as in like I'm misrepresenting what the courts are about. It was more, I didn't want to give anybody the impression that they weren't going to get a fair shake, you know, and that was, it was an ethical standard that all of us tried to keep. So even, for example, oh gosh, we lived on a busy street in North Salt Lake, and one time a political candidate, you know, I'm sure he was a very nice guy, but he came, you know, he plunked a giant sign on our fence, and I came home and I looked at Chris. I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, it's a sign. Apparently, you've agreed to this." And I said, "There's no way I would have agreed to that because of my ethical obligations." And so I called up the guy and I said, "I'm sure that sign cost you a lot. There is no way that I can have that up because of my ethical obligations." And he ran over. I was probably maybe a little snarky, like, "If you don't want me to throw it away, like come and get it." Yeah. So I'm sure it was expensive. So, but that, it was for a reason. It was because we don't want politics injected into the courts. And I think right now, especially, we're in this really weird, dangerous time where that's happening too much. And I worked at the courts when we really had this gold standard process for getting judges on the bench and, you know, the process of evaluating them and then their retentions. And now it just feels like there's so much vitriol that's being injected unfairly into it. Now, granted, like the courts have been asked to weigh in on some really hard things, but but I, you know, I'm a true believer in judicial independence and being able to maintain that. You know, there was, I mean, every time that, and I appeared a few times before, you know, the Supreme Court. After I left working for there, when I was in the general counsel's office, it was kind of this weird thing where I would represent judges or court staff and have to bring up cases to the Supreme Court. And without fail, every single time, Chief Justice Durant would just recuse because, like, you don't want to give any impression whatsoever, even if he could, you know, look at this case and not involve, you know, whatever personal feelings he had about me or my family. He could separate those. He always was so cautious because even just the appearance of anything. You know, I understood that very, very well. And what was hard about that situation is because I couldn't become really good friends with every one of them because I thought, well, if I bring a case before the court and every single judge has to recuse, that could be a problem, right? So we always kind of had to maintain that healthy distance and balance despite all the work that I was doing within the court. So, but I feel like I will say to people, I was born and raised in the Supreme Court because it instilled in me this passion for it matters so much. A healthy democracy depends upon an independent judiciary, and so that's where, you know, if you look on my LinkedIn, I defend the courts a lot. I come out a lot on, you know, about not saying things, you know, not imposing political requirements on the courts and really trying to maintain that balance. So, you know, so that's where one of my interests lies. But I also feel like there's a faith-based part to it. Our prophet has come out and said, you know, we have to have a healthy democracy. Not only do we have to have healthy debate, but we can't have so much distrust in our branches of government. And if we are constantly lobbing accusations, you know, across the aisle, like, we're not going to be having a healthy democracy, right? Yeah, and the rule of law matters, and the rule of law is it's connected to high ethical standards, you know, which is part of a faith-based experience as well. So to me, it all works together, and that's that's a big reason why I will open my mouth and I will say something when it's appropriate, because I realize, like, I have an experience and a perspective that not everybody has.
Oh, I don't. I'm sitting here thinking, okay, so what do I do? You know, like, what do I do in this kind of a circumstance, in this environment that we're in?
I think that in this environment, I mean, I think we start with the basics, which is that we'd be willing to have conversations that with other people who don't share our viewpoints, because I feel strongly that our tech companies are very complicit in the tribalism that has developed around these issues, and it's being exploited by those who seek to gain the most from it. But I can't lay the blame squarely at the feet of just the tech companies, but they've created the platforms that have enabled this kind of evil and vitriol to flourish. And I think the more that we can push back on that and just, you know, remind people, hey, if you're in like an online forum or something, and Mormon Women for Ethical Government is very good at this and training people on it. You have to be able to say, no, we're not going to act like this. I understand that you on the other side of this conversation are not just a one-dimensional person with a keyboard. You are a three-dimensional person, well, a four, you know, taking into account their spirit, and you deserve respect just as I deserve it. You know, and so I think that's one of the ways that we push back, you know, is using our faith background, but also like a healthy understanding of this democratic experience. It will fail if we decide that everybody is the enemy, right?
Yeah. It's so hard because not being a part of your environment and all the knowledge that you have. So here I am, there's this person, and reading everything that comes across, whether it's from the media, social media, other individuals, it's just like, I don't believe anything. I mean, I have my own faith beliefs, right? But these articles that come my way, I'm like, I don't even know. Which almost leads at times for me to just say, okay, never mind.
I'm just going to tune it out.
I'm not going to pay attention.
That's how we ended up here, by the way.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's like, honestly, I really feel like the thinkers kind of sat down, and all is well in Zion sort of thing. And then
being called to the carpet here.
Yeah, well, and my understanding too is that there was a point, it was really when social media kind of started to become big, is that people who were all of a sudden kind of felt empowered because they had this voice, right, online, started showing up more to, the political things that previously had been kind of boring, right? It's kind of more of like what does the community need, but now it's almost kind of like a life or death competition, who's right, whereas it's not, and I'm affiliated with a political party here, is largely represented, but we're all trying to get at the same issues.
Yeah.
Like we want good, healthy families. We want good, healthy workplaces. We want people to thrive. We want businesses to thrive. We want there to be opportunities. We want people to have housing and food and stability and all of those things, right? Yeah, like the things that make the world and humanity tick. And the parties are just looking at it in different ways.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so in my mind, neither of them is totally wrong, but that's why we have to work together, because that's the sausage making of policy, and I've worked in policy, is like you can't just plant down your flag and say, I'm not moving from this spot, right? Because you're not going to get everything you want. And I mediate in my practice, and that's kind of how we go into it, is like I have my like must-haves, but I also know that I'm going to have to kind of like lift my flag a little bit and be willing to move, because if I want to resolve this and I want peace, this is not going to end well if I stay firmly planted, right?
Makes sense. Well, this has been amazing. I have one last question for you. You've referenced and have, shared some of the just trials, hard times of life, right? Leaving your family, coming to a totally new state, environment, just completely different. Those things are hard, right? Whether we choose them or not, our trials, our life's experiences can be hard. And when we're in the middle of that, sometimes it's hard to see a way out.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to make sense of what we're experiencing. When we get through it, we can look back and say, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But in the middle, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. So
what advice would you give to our audience who may be in the middle of their hard?
I think that goes back to, what we were talking about previously with look for the temple experience in, the Liberty Jail, because it's, and I've had to have this conversation with my teenage daughter recently of, when the boys that she's interested or whatever, it doesn't go well. I say, your experience is that it always gets better. And so look towards that it's going to get better. But in the meantime, find those temple moments. Find those moments like where you get the tender mercies. You'll find them, because when we're in the hard, our senses get so heightened that I feel like we have this kind of extra sensory ability to kind of tune into other forces that are trying to help us. But we have to really key into that and not ignore it or not think it's a possibility. Because that's been my experience, is that it is a possibility, and we have to position ourselves, to be open to those possibilities and to feel them.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Stacy.
Oh, you're welcome. My friends, you heard it from Nancy. Life's not easy, right? But as we're going through our heart, if we look for our temple experiences, those moments where we felt peace, we found joy even in the hard, it gives us hope to keep moving forward. So let's do that together. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining me on Waking the Why. If today's story moved you, share it with someone who needs it. And don't forget, your why is worth waking up for.